All right, welcome back. This is going to be our final installment of looking at this passage in Matthew 14 of Jesus and Peter walking on water. But I want you to think about one thing this week, and that's really what keeps us so many times from stepping out of the boat is I think that we're afraid that we'll fall. We're afraid that we'll sink. We're afraid that we'll fail. And again, if you've read this story over the last few weeks, or if you know this story, you would know that Peter took a few steps onto the water and then ultimately began to sink. It said that he saw the wind, he saw the waves, he became afraid, and he began to sink, and he called out for Jesus to save him. And it says that immediately Jesus pulled him out of the water. But we're so afraid to fall sometimes that we refuse to step out of the boat. But that's not really what faith is. And again, if we're not putting ourselves in these uncomfortable situations, then we're probably not really growing in our faith. And if you look at the life of Peter, there's a couple things that we can learn from him. And one is I would say that Peter became one of the greatest leaders that the church has known. But he failed over and over and over. But he continued to step out of the boat. So we look at this story, and we see Peter steps out of the boat. He takes this amazing leap of faith, puts this amazing level of trust in Jesus. And he begins to walk on water, but then he becomes distracted by the wind and the waves. He becomes afraid, and he sinks. We could look a little bit later, and we see Peter just make these brash moves. We have a moment where we see that Jesus actually tells Peter that he says, "Get behind me, Satan," from something that Peter has said. And that's a pretty strong statement from Jesus. In this moment of failure in Peter's thinking, we see Peter deny Jesus 3 times later. And yet, through this failure, Peter's able to grow into the leader that we know him to be. And so my challenge to you is you begin to look at what would it look like for me to take these leaps of faith? What would it look like for me to step out of the boat? We're so afraid to fall so many times that we just never step out. But I want to challenge you to think about the fact that you can actually grow through failure, that God can use your failure, and God will use that to grow you into the person that he desires you to be if you're willing to step out of the boat, if you're willing to step out in faith with him. And if you fall, you can trust that he will pull you up out of the water. He will set you out again, and you might fall again. And I've fallen so many times. And yet through those failures, so many times God can grow us into the men and women of God that he wants us to be. So my challenge to you is to not let the fear of failing, the fear of sinking, the fear of the wind and the waves to keep you from stepping out of the boat, but to step out, and if you fall, to allow him to pick you up, and then to go and step out in faith again, and step out in faith again, and step out in faith again, knowing that it's through trials, that it's through things like that he will make your faith perfect and complete and lacking nothing, much like he did with Peter.